I think we're ready to start. Welcome to the Poetry Room, everybody, at City Lights. My name is Peter Maravellis. I'm the events director here, and we are thrilled to have Nicolas Ballet with us here tonight, celebrating Shock Factory, the visual culture of industrial music. It is published by Intellect Books and distributed by University of Chicago Press. And it makes a great deal of sense that we would be celebrating this book here because City Lights, in many respects, was a kind of a dissemination point for a lot of ideas, a lot of books that influenced industrial culture, industrial music, and also Vale, who sadly could not be with us tonight. He's got a cold, but we may have some material that have features Vale, perhaps, that we can show. He was an alumni of many years here at City Lights and founded Search and Destroy. Actually, we're hosting an event for Search and Destroy in a couple of weeks. There's going to be a new anthology. It collects the entire archive of Search and Destroys all in one volume. Once again, it hadn't been available for many years, so please come to that if you're going to be around. But tonight's book, a very, very compelling exploration of industrial culture. And though industrial music has spread far and wide and infiltrated a wide span of popular culture, its origins are rarely appreciated enough for its multidisciplinary creativity that really emerged from the genre. And industrial music spawned a coherent visual culture operating at the intersection of a multitude of media. This includes collage, mail art, installation, film, performance, sound, and video. It brought a lot of very, very interesting people together. And so this book has really kind of initiated a very close inspection of the legacy of the modernity and growing pervasive influence of technology that industrial culture was interested in. So Shock Factory is a deep dive into this world, and Nicolas Ballet has performed a great service in bringing to light a greater appreciation of the movement and the artists who are at the forefront of it. So Nicolas is an art historian and assistant curator at the New Media Department at the Centre Pompidou in Paris. He is the author of books and articles exploring the visual and sonic contributions of countercultures and experimental artistic practices. We're, of course, going to have him sign books at the very end. We'll also have a Q&A at the end of his talk. For those of you online, we do not have a link tonight for the book, but if you call City Lights at the front counter, we can do a mail order for you tomorrow. So please do that if you're interested. So please join us in giving him a warm welcome. Nicolas, welcome to City Lights.
Thank you. Wow, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So thank you for being here tonight for this book launch of Shock Factory, the visual culture of industrial music. First of all, I would like to thank Verl for originally accepting also this invitation. Unfortunately, he's sick tonight. I just heard about that 2 hours ago, but we will manage to do something interesting, I hope. And of course, if you have some questions about my accent, if you don't understand anything, please ask. Feel free to ask, of course, and also about the topic. But we will see that after maybe a 40 minutes presentation. I hope it will be short for you. And thank you very much, of course, to Peter for organizing this event in this beautiful context. I'm very, very happy, delighted, honored to be there and to discover also San Francisco. It's the first time for me. So it's just amazing after presenting also the book in different cities in the US, in New York, Philadelphia, Richmond, Virginia, and also in Los Angeles with Jake Jupiter Larsen and Renassi. So we'll now briefly present you the content of the book and its purpose before talking more about another topic in the book, the sex-positive feminism in industrial music back then in the 70s and in the 80s. So I'm, again, very happy and honestly a bit relieved to be able to present this research project after so many years, especially here. And I started working on it back in 2011. And this work is a condensed version of a PhD in art history that I defended 7 years ago in Paris. And of course, I had to revise these results in order to produce a more concise written version with the aim of publishing the book in French and in English. So the first version was published by Les Presses du Réel 2 years ago. And the English edition just came out with Intellect, and actually it's an expanded version with a third more text and a ton of extra images, 500 around. So just imagine the work involved in clearing the rights, the copyrights in order to reproduce all those images, and finding also the HD version, from Swabring Rissol to Andy Warhol and Club Moral to Marcel Duchamp. Actually, it's only 8 months of work, not full-time job, of course, but it's for the benefit, for the sake of this book, which is organized in 3 different sections that explore the rise and development of the scene from the late 60s to the mid-90s. So as you can see, the first part, The Last of England, which is a title by Derek Jarman, Post-Industrial Trauma and a Tradition of Subversion, looks at the post-industrial context in which artists were working in Europe, in the US, and a bit in Japan too, with the case of Masami Akita and Merzbow, for instance, but not only. And how some of their work were connected with the legacy of modern art movements like Dada, Surrealism, but also Constructivism, Futurism, and the Situationist, of course, with the notion of détournement by Debord, but not only, the cut-up technique, which was very relevant in the practice of those artists back then, in the punk scenes, but also in industrial. The second part, nothing short of a total war, industrial dissidence and shock tactics, digs into the different themes tackled by these groups: mind control, totalitarianism, anti-psychiatry, crime, pornography, BDSM subculture, and how they used these topics to trying to subvert societies of control. And the third part, Body and Soul, industrial occulture, focuses on the links between industrial music and the occult through different figures like Aleister Crowley, but also Austin Osman Spare, people who, for some artists, offer new ways of thinking about deprogramming the individual. So this book is an attempt to study the visual history of industrial music, which stood as the intersection of various expressions, as you said, in different countries. And the project stemmed from a desire to explore the artworks and concepts of industrial music and include them within the field of art history, thanks to the productions of bands I had been listening to for years, such as Cabaret Voltaire or even Throbbing Whistle and SPK. It's about uncovering entire bodies of work, but also joining the dots between the different sources in the industrial galaxy. And this project is not just aimed at fans of the scene, but also at researchers, universities, museums, libraries, anyone who would like to know more about the industrial art movement. And I will now give you some historical background. I'm sure you are also, some of you, very familiar to it. But in order to contextualize the emergence of and the development of this movement before exploring a more specific topic. So industrial music revealed from the mid-70s and throughout the 80s, a global visual culture that brought together different media: graphics, films, experimental films, video, performance, under the growing influence of technology. The sound experiments, designed by the main actors of the movement, building synthesizers, manipulating and transforming recorded sounds taken from various sources, stood in stark contrast with the codes of rock culture of the time and the emergence of punk. The backgrounds of the early industrial artists placed them within formats and working protocols that opposed the self-promotion system of the music industry. The industrial mindset, conceptualized by the English band Throbbing Gristle, thanks to the expression coined by Monty Casasa, industrial music for industrial people, sought to subvert all forms of standardization, notably through the creation of independent labels founded by the group themselves to disseminate their works with posters, newsletters, postcards, audio tapes, records, of course, and videos. And the aggressive sonic work, designed by the first industrial generation, enriched a range of radical visual productions rooted in the modernist utopias of the early 20th century. In this respect, we can find the formation Cabaret Voltaire from Sheffield, with a reference to the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, the stronghold of the first version of Dada. When the French act Deform referred to the both journal of the same name. The Japanese project Merzbow alludes to Kurt Schwitters, and the Spanish artist of Esplendor Geometrico openly displayed the influence of Futurism. So the term industrial, it's a bit strange back then in the 70s to find this term in a post-industrial context, especially in Europe, in Britain, but also in France, in Spain, in Italy. What is this term? It characterizes the work of artists who, through specific visual and sonic concerns, attempt to articulate a critique of the standardization of industry and mass media by foregrounding the most conflictual aspects of post-industrial society of this period. The way industrial artists became aware of the transformations inherent in the emergence of information technologies reveals the resistance to a power exerted over individuals, identified back then at the same period, actually mid-70s, in the Michel Foucault notion of biopolitics in his history of sexuality, which is a great bipolar technology, anatomic and biological, directed towards the performances of the body, with attention to the processes of life that characterized a power whose highest function was perhaps no longer to kill, but to invest life through and through. So the industrial movement created a multimedia research platform that must be fully integrated in the development of postmodern aesthetics of this period. The Industrial Culture Handbook, and of course, I had plenty questions to veil tonight with Sick, in order to explore also the way he tried, and he did it very well, to document the alternative scenes from the 70s, research and destroy, and then research publications. But we will see a bit through the introduction of John Savage how Vail participated in shaping the global industrial movement from the US. So this Industrial Culture Handbook actually attests to the importance of this scene, gathering articles, interviews, and book sources on the movement's most emblematic projects. And I will propose you a short excerpt taken from the documentary by Marianne Wallace, who is right here. And you also published a fanzine that transcribed actually the different interviews that we can find in the artists of the industrial scene, except in which we can hear Vail about industrial music.
Those who were not there in 1983, when the Industrial Culture Handbook was first published, we are now going to try to establish the philosophical and adventurous ambience of that time when we were trying to record and disseminate not just a musical movement, but an entire cultural revolution and mindset and philosophy. I always thought it had something to do with the rejection of the guitar trio to rock music, the singer and the bass guitar drums formula. And I always thought it had something to do with putting subliminals and sometimes horrific, but definitely anti-authoritarian kind of imagery. I thought there was a lot more visual component to the what I would consider industrial or more industrial, events or cultural productions. Cabaret Voltaire, whenever I saw them play, they always had films of slideshows and strange recordings mixed in their music taken from the CIA or something. And there was, and noise. Wait a minute, noise. Noise was sort of okay. People were experimenting with noise and not, sort of music that wasn't notes, and just experimenting with how noisy was too noisy.
So, yep. Sorry. In this industrial culture handbook, right here, actually it's a reissue, but for a special version on glossy paper, and with it's a art cover version, so you can just consult it right now. We can find a foreword by the music critic John Savage, who also identified 5 different characteristics of the industrial movement. First of all, he told us about organizational autonomy, the importance of independent labels and the ways in which acts control their own systems of distribution and production. A lot of independent labels shaped the scene. Industrial Records by Soaring Whistle, Double Vision, Cabaret Voltaire, Stereo Records by Nocturnal Emissions, and I strongly recommend you the book edited by Amaya Productions by Ross Waitman, who is right here, Electronic Resistance by Nigel Ayers, but also Sordide Sentimental in France with Jean-Pierre Turmel, or even Les Nouvelles Propagandes by La Nomenclature and Minimata, also in France. And of course, these communication strategies were also accompanied by newsletters and magazines published by the acts themselves, circulating their musical works, concepts, related productions, and addresses, echoing the Dadaist initiatives of the early 20th century, with industrial news, for instance, by Soaring Whistle and Force Mentale by Club Moral from Belgium. And fanzines, produced also by fans of the movement, were also very important in the circulation of information within this artistic niche, such as Unsound Discipline or Biozone, among many other great fanzines. The dissemination of these magazines and fanzines, which in collage relied heavily on mail art practices, whose international exchanges fostered the manipulation of audio cassettes. This medium offered a big freedom in the production of works. Its ease of recording and low cost encouraged visual artists to produce unique objects, and sometimes also quite funny. Another point, access to information. The struggle for control is no longer a question of territory, but of communication. The aim was to reclaim control of our information monopolized by the mass media by any means necessary, including disinformation strategies and shock. This brought artists into an information war intended to counter the norms of mass media. The human organism was considered one information system among others, whose psychological capacities could be affected in order to blur or disrupt the signals that normally keep the body in balance. William Burroughs' Electronic Revolution, for instance, served as a key reference for this artist, as they materialized, or trying to materialize, his concept with a shared goal: regaining control over the channels of dissemination for both music and message, as exemplified by the research edition, bringing together text by Burroughs and Throbbing Griswold and also Brian Geising. And of course, we could already find this obsession with the figure of William Burroughs in the Search and Destroy magazine edited by Vail in the 70s. So the main actors of the movement sought to deprogram the individual, resisting all forms of conditioning through intellectual discipline and radical visual and sonic experimentation. Savage links this use of sound to a third point, resorting to deliberately inappropriate musical practices in the context of contemporary rock criticism, offered an escape from both the insulated realm of contemporary art and the standardization of the music industry. Synthetic experiments, sonic repetitions using rhythmic leaps, for instance, or total improvisation and the absence of traditional musical training were also forms of artistic freedom, allowing acts to reach a broader audience. The use of synthesizers helped create a rupture in art. Industrial music was first and foremost a matter of noise, as Vail said also. Its aesthetic is better described as an interlocking of sonic mazes rather than organized musical phrases. The model of anti-music deployed in noise-based and hypnotic forms also provided a way to describe state of constant and generalized alienations. We can now just watch a short excerpt of Discipline by Throbbing Griswold. I love this excerpt, it's a classic, but why not? So by disrupting ordinary listening habits, these artists found an uncompromising form of expression that positioned itself at the intersection of multiple media again. The principle of extra musical elements brings literary, philosophical, and scientific sources into many artistic practices. These fields provided the industrial concepts with effective means of altering the listener's consciousness and contributed to the détournement of everyday consumer technologies, video cameras, alternative press, postal services, exposing the strategies through which the music industry and other media functions as instruments of control. Ordinary techniques of manipulation experienced daily by cultural consumers, were revealed and critiqued through the use of atypical art media. This approach also operated through the use of violent imagery, as described in the fifth and final point, shock tactics. Those tactics try to confront social and moral taboos by incorporating oppressive elements in concerts, electric arts, the spectrum of sound beyond human perception, infra and ultrasound, walls of sounds, but also screenings of violent images and videos. The deployment of aggressive visual and sonic expression aimed above all to lead the audience to question their own relationship to and reactions before a reality that has been brutally exposed. The recycling of historical archives, police archives, and medical imagery, as well as the use of pornography content, supplied a radical visual culture intended for an audience experiencing a form of painful entertainment. Shock thus become a defining feature of the movement and its countercultural commitment. These five characteristics given by John Savage designed a movement that attempt, depending on the origin of the groups, of course, even through the collectively built an international scene operating through postal networks, to establish an alternative social model, one that would be constructed upon the ruins of earlier industrial societies. In this regard, the American artist, today based in Los Angeles, Jakes Jupiter Larsen, said, "This world will fall into its destruction, and this is good because the ruins of the old will be the architecture of the new. To destroy something can be the breaking up of entities into more dynamic pieces to be collaged together into new forms." This second generation of artists in industrial music in the very early of in the early 80s appropriated urban and industrial wastelands as a new creative space. For instance, British collective Test Department played a central role in the development of this new area of the industrial genre. "The old industry," I quote, "is already dead. So what we are doing is taking the remnants and transforming them into something new, something creative again." Industrial visual culture is really important in Test Department work. They are one of the first bands to assimilate industrial decay in their productions, sounds, and images. And given their political commitment, these elements appear as tributes to the working class. In the mid-80s, for instance, they supported striking English miners by going on a tour with a Welsh male voice corps for the album Shoulder to Shoulder, donating the profit to the National Union of Mine Workers. Test Depth also explored a lot of different domains: film, theater, music, graphism, through a constructivist influences with Rodchenko, Vertov, Eisenstein, and especially in Programme for Progress, a series of films directed by Brett Turnbull. And here is a short excerpt of this series too. The German band, so we can see the different Rodchenko influences also in the different works of this department, and the record label called Ministry of Power, which is more than a simple record label too back then. So the German band Einstürzaude Neubauten, and I also struggle to pronounce German words, also appropriating industrial wastelands as new spaces for creation, questioning the future of post-industrial societies through the development of an aesthetic of urban decay. This is the case with the video Albert Mensch, conceived by the Japanese director Sogo Ishii, and filmed in 16 millimeters in a former industrial area of Tokyo during the ACT's Japanese tour in '85. So the independent press and record labels, the development of artistic activity outside institutional and circuits in order to demystify the field of contemporary art, in a way, and even the deprofessionalization of the artist role, among many other committed approaches, provided avenues for creating a new model. And this model that lied at the heart of the avant-garde creative process was appropriated by a generation of experimental artists in the 70s, and the exhibition Prostitutions, for instance, stands as a key marker of this aspect. The exhibition reveals the infiltration of the 70s pornographic industry by Josefani Tutti, who played in Deriving, and who was also in the performance art group Cum Transmissions, we'll talk about it, in order to subvert the male gaze of that era. A work that would later influence the performances of many women artists. Here are some excerpts from the book to give you more details on this more specific topic. So I tried to write. In '75, Josefani Tutti began to feature in pornographic films. Her stated purpose was to explore her own creative impulses in an England where obscenity laws made it problematic to produce and distribute this type of content. Influenced by the American filmmaker Stephen Dworkin, the performer sought to investigate the effects of the male gaze on the female psyche while deconstructing the genre. And I quote her, she said, "The sexual exploitation and objectivation of women by men was a feminist hot topic, very high on their agenda, and I and other sex workers were perceived as the enemy. I didn't identify with 70s feminism. It didn't speak for me, or the diverse and complex nature of women. I was no victim of exploitation. I was exploiting the sex industry for my own purposes, to subvert and use it to create my own art. It was my choice. I wanted to get to know the sex industry from within, to speak from first-hand experience. I was transgressing rules, feminist ones included. I refused to be defined or confined by my own gender." End quote. So Josefani Tutti's reflection on how the female gender is perceived and instrumentalized in the porn industry are informed by her experience as an actress and model. The title of Prostitution, the show, reflected in the image that illustrated its poster. A photograph entitled Sexual Transgression No. 5, in which Fanny Tutti appeared masked and lying on a couch dressed in a gelbe taille and black stockings. This image refers to Edouard Manet Olympia, which, inspired by Titian Venus of Urbino, created a scandal at the Salon de Paris in 1865 by representing the daily life of a prostitute based on the codes of the great religious painting. Olympia's gaze and pose evokes a spirit of confrontation found in Fanny Tutti's photography. Sexual transgression number 5 exemplified the transgressive purpose of a seminal event in the history of the industrial movement. Prostitution, since its opening, marked the transformation of cum transmissions into throwing wrestle. The principal aim of prostitution was to exhibit Fanny Tutti's work as a glamour model in an artistic context. The pornographic shots signed by the artist and framed to be hung in an art gallery were to be displayed alongside other shots of Fanny Tutti in ordinary situations. This interrogation of the divide between representation and reality is also a comment on artists' economic means of survival, while revealing how presentation is everything by exhibiting, and I quote Éric Dubois, the French author, images of a pornographic nature developed as a result of an artistic process on the same plane as other perfectly ordinary domestic images. Fanny Tutti intended to highlight the way the female body, sanitized and idealized by the socially tolerated art world, is used in pornographic magazines to reflect what societies imposed on women by attributing to them a single role, specific functions, unquote. The intent is to delve beyond the superficial level of this magazine in order to confront male readers with their own gaze, as defined by British filmmaker and theorist Laura Mulvey in the context of Hollywood cinema, actually at the same period in 1975. So, Fanny Tutti's explorations contributed to a sex-positive feminist performative agenda, which paved the way for many artists to appropriate BDSM codes using brutality as a masquerade. Bill Westwood, British artist, for instance, created radical performances with Fistfuck, a female duo formed along with Diana Crystal Rogerson, following performances with Antal Nemeth. Westwood's art developed a radical form of expression with Crystal, increasingly making use of visual and sonic aggression developed through the prism of bondage subculture. This appropriation of a form of industrial-style violence is itself a project of identity reconstruction, highlighting the differences between male and female destruction in art. This process of gender reconfiguration manifests itself in the case of the exquisitely named Fistfuck by overturning the violence perpetrated by men within the industrial movement. The concept of womanliness as a masquerade, as defined by John Riviere in the late 20s, in 29, is here turned into an expression composed of violent images and aggressive behaviors. She said, women who wished for masculinity may put on a mask of womanliness to avert anxiety and the retribution feared from men, unquote. The term masquerade is an ideal label for the subversive strategies of Fistfuck who aim to subvert the model of the woman object of Western societies and sweep away the misogynistic attitudes of the industrial scene of the 70s and 80s. The mask of womanliness is here replaced by that of a combatant in Fistfuck case, adopting the opposite extreme of the masquerade as identified by Riviere. The intent remains the same, however, to deceive the male gaze in order to better counter it. And the adoption of extreme behaviors enabled Jill Westwood to hide the possession of masculinity and to avert the reprisal accepted if she was found to possess. The presence of men on stage, allowing themselves to be publicly humiliated by Fistfuck, gives a lie to Bataille's claims that women put themselves forward as objects for the aggressive desire of men, unquote. Here, men assumed the characteristics of the object being subject to the desires of the two artists. Fistfuck challenged the established codes of male domination, and I quote Jill Westwood. I'm sorry, I just forget to show you the images. That's a shame. So here is Jill Westwood, the photo of one of the acts of the shows of Fistfuck back then, and a quote by Westwood. She said, "I think the influence of these industrial, subversive, male artists, musicians did inspire me to up the ante and go further in the direction of exploring and creating works that focused on power, violence, fear, and vulnerability. Perhaps I was competing with the boys, thus it did lead Crystal and I to thinking about being like a female White House, the Power Electronics Act in England, like alpha females." So Fistfuck radical performances tend to reverse the focus of the aggression into the usual proponents of violence, the men, while developing a female voice among industrial performers in an effort to recalibrate the usual sexual imbalance. Another quote by Jill Westwood: "The world about this world, which is of course not innocent. The world Fistfuck conjured up a world of taboo, of some other wide and unknown physical, sexual, intimate bodily experiences between people, a way of exploding, confronting, and questioning usual classifications. Maybe also pursuits of states of experience through the body." So, what I wanted to show you through these few examples are the strategies adopted by different artists who converged around a project of deprogramming that has evolved in different fields. It's not only a matter of subverting, the societies of control, but also of deconstructing certain behaviors and habits that are too deeply rooted in our everyday lives. And it is in this sense, especially, that the industrial scene raised questions very early on that remain highly relevant today. And new generations of artists are now operating these historical scenes to develop hybrid, more inclusive, and highly compelling art projects. And if you have some questions now or remark about those different aspects, which are not very easy to deal with, especially in terms of power, violence, totalitarianism, of course, it's another aspect, but we can talk about it. Please feel free to ask. I will try to answer. And thank you again for your presence.
Please wait until we arrive at the microphone where you are.
I'm sure you're aware of San Francisco's own survival research laboratories. Do they fit into this construct? And how do they fit into this construct?
Yeah, of course, I had plenty of questions to Vail about Mark Pauline and the survival research laboratories, for instance. And yeah, to me, it's very interesting to see their name and the work of Mark Pauline, especially in the Industrial Culture Handbook, because it could be very different from a band like Cabaret Voltaire, Soaring Gristle, or SPK, especially since, you know, it's more about radical performance art in the case of survival research laboratories. But in a way, it also helps to join the dots between the different references that we can find in the industrial world, global culture, because Mark Pauline tried also to materialize a few concepts of ballad with Crash, for instance. He did some installations, very violent ones, related to the work of ballad. And to me, we can find this science fiction or non-science fiction, very specific universe of ballad in other industrial acts, such as SPK, for instance. Graham Revell, he used to publish some text about Ballard's works, for instance, or he also conducted some interviews, which were published by research publications. And but in my research, maybe it helped me to understand the main differences between the US and Europe in terms of industrial music, because I thought that survivalism, for instance, was a more relevant topic here in America. And I asked these questions to Vel, for instance. What about survivalism? You know, prepper doomers and in America, because as French, I can't understand that. I didn't experience it, you know, in my childhood. But I find it very, you know, fascinating, of course, because it's part of the awareness of the movement, you know, how we can build our mind by ourselves, you know, in a new alternative model and in a counterculture after all. And of course, in San Francisco, you know that by heart. And Vel told me that about, you know, survivalism. He told me, we are in America. Survivalism started here. The myth of the self-sufficient lone gunslinger started here. The rely on yourself, loner, paladin style, and many other Western genre movies gave a lot of praise on TV Young America, male children, not only the idea that they could be resourceful and carve out their own territory and practically construct civilization single-handedly on their plot of Western land. That culture led to survival research laboratories, unquote. And also, it's very interesting to know that Jake Jupiter Larsen, for instance, in the 90s, and also before that, Monty Casazza worked for and with Mark Pauline in order to design some sounds for the collective. So we can find some links in between industrial music and the survival research laboratories. I don't know if I answer your question.
May I add something to that?
Sure.
Concerning the detritus of industry, because if you wandered through San Francisco in the mid 70s to early 80s, the entire expanse of the South of Market was essentially a free area. You could walk into buildings and just pull out things that old businesses that had folded, and this is how Mark Pauline actually got a lot of the equipment that he used. And he was, of course, his studios were always located in these very desolate parts of town, where oftentimes the trains would go by. You'd have these roaring sounds. Monty Casazza was based in Oakland at one point, had a studio that was, you know, again, a kind of a warehouse space where he could kind of have a free reign and do all kinds of experiments with little like devices that would blip. This is pre-Eno. But again, in an area where there would be these like sounds that would be really signature sounds of industrial music. So I think that we need to think about, you know, the detritus of industry and how this freedom to simply utilize what was left behind kind of led to the development of an aesthetic. I think I'll leave it at that.
And here we are. Right. Okay, wait. I'm just trying to share for everyone this content. Yeah, okay. For instance, yeah, performance in back then, late 70s in San Francisco. And actually, as the members of Solving Gristle attend this show, Interesting. And of course, the title, very relevant, The Battlefields of Tomorrow. And Monte Casasa, also with survival research laboratories for performance by factories. Anyway.
Anyone else?
I have a question. I just have a comment.
All right.
This is one of the most comprehensive collections of industrial culture I've ever seen in one place. So thank you for putting in the effort and the work to do this. It is absolutely beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very kind. Thank you.
Could you comment on anything that didn't make the cut for the book, either because you couldn't get licensing or it was just maybe a little too, in the fringe?
Sorry, I didn't.
The question is like, what didn't make it into the book because maybe you couldn't get a license, or maybe it was too, maybe a little on the fringe? Yes.
Yes, thank you. It's a very interesting question. Of course, it's always a struggle. Okay, I wanted to include, I can answer like this. I wanted to include, oh my God, that's such a shame, but anyway, some film stills of this science fiction movie entitled Looker from 1981, because it was quite related to mind control and industrial music to me, and also The Devils by Ken Russell. And yeah, because of course when it came to Satanism or a certain version of it, but also the satanic panic in America in the 80s and 90s, I thought it was quite relevant to also explore the track of Anton LaVey and with Boyd Rice and all that aspect. And I wanted some just still, so I asked to the Warner Bros. Industry, and they replied 4 months after my first request. But the book was already printed, or the pages, it was not bonded yet. So, and I kept them in the book. So I had to change it because they didn't want to include those stills, and they didn't tell me why. Just, we don't want to be involved in this project, because it was maybe too small, or I don't know, it's okay. But 4 months after, and I thought I would have to pay for the other images that I also paid to include them for the copyrights. That's why I kept them, but they really didn't want to. And especially since I knew that I would not have another answer to my negotiation, maybe after 4 other months, I just decided to delete the images, but I had also to pay the printer to do that. Yeah. But I have also to respect that, it's very rare when it happens, but with artists, for instance, Masami Akita today, even if it's a very important and I think interesting aspect in his work, he doesn't want to be involved with any bondage material today. So I asked him if it was okay, and he told me that he didn't want to, publish some artworks of compilations, and I totally respected it and just not include them. That's it. The 2 main examples.
So we have a question from online. Amanda asks, if industrial aesthetics historically used provocation as a tool for dissolving meaning, where do you see provocation happening in current culture? Do you still see the boundary play of transgression, or have we settled into binary antagonist cultural politics?
That's a very good question too. Maybe it raises the question of this expression counterculture. Is it still relevant? Can we talk about a counterculture today, especially here? I don't know. It's an open question. I'm not sure, really, from the 60s to the present, to today. And maybe transgression. I don't know. Do we need transgression? Maybe we need also way to communicate to maybe the new countercultures are outside the social media, for instance, in some new squats, new areas that we don't know the existence yet. So the new provocation or transgression, it's kind of a business today. It's an industry. So I'm not sure it's still relevant to talk about those notions. It was back then, but the way we communicate changed a lot, and it was it's fascinating to see how industrial acts were very aware of this control or all the most conflictual aspect of societies of control. It was true, and it's true than ever today. With the social media and Instagram, Facebook. I'm the first to consult huge content on Instagram, for instance, and I'm wondering what is the purpose after all, of all those images and content. And it could be great, but it could be cool also to just focus on a new book, on a new publication. I don't know. But it's quite disturbing. Yes, it's what the French philosopher Bernard Stiegler, for instance, in the 90s called the hyper, from the post-industrial societies to the hyper-industrial societies, in which we are all blocked in our own electronic calendars, and etc., etc.
Anyone else?
Yep, it doesn't work. Here, right in the center.
What is your most cherished element in the book, and what might you write next?
I loved writing about mind control. I thought it was fascinating to try to make some links between scientific materials and what industrial music perceived in it. So I loved it. I loved also the sex positive aspect and perspectives of the scene, because it's an aspect that is not very present in other books, for instance, and that's a shame, because when you see Josephine Tutti, but not only Fist Folk, or plenty other artists like Debbie Jaffer with Master Relationship in the US, or even Suck Dogs, even if it's not industrial acts in itself, it's so relevant, in the way they fight for, new behaviors, new perception. And what's next? Maybe I would like to explore younger generations, the current ones, who try to appropriate noise and industrial culture, but in a new agenda with more, I said inclusive, yeah, sure, of course, but also more hybrid, with new musical genre in it, from Gabber to hyperpop, for instance. And I think it's very encouraging to see how creative the new generations are. And in terms of visual, there is something also happening, so it's a good thing. and also a book, a collective book on anti-psychiatry, the links between anti-psychiatry and the art from the 60s to the present, but it's another story and quite difficult to explore. So that's why it's collective, to gather different also approaches about it. It's important. Thank you.
I was around back in those days. I was buying those issues of Research and Search and Destroy as they were coming out. One of the things that was prevalent was this flirtation and edge around images from Nazism. You had people that used it for shock, and you had people that fetishized it. And I'm not going to say anybody was in the scene for the wrong reasons. That's too simplistic. But there was a constant, I would call it a battle between people in the subculture. Boyd Rice and I would get into it on occasion. I was just curious if you cover much of that in your book, or if you have anything to say on that issue.
Of course, and it was. Thank you for your question about the most, the how did I enjoy also a part of the topic. But the most difficult part was this one, totalitarianism, and I didn't want to, delete this topic because it's part of the strategy of the right wing. We don't have any white power guys in your rank, but yes, it's a case actually. So, and I didn't want to avoid the topic. So it was one of my questions also to the artist I had the chance to meet about, even if they weren't involved in the fascist aesthetics. What about totalitarianism? Or can we explore this topic? Or what is the purpose? What in terms of provocation, in terms of catharsis for the German artists, especially, because it's not the same background, cultural background, not the same history, comparing to the British artist or even the French artist with the collaboration. So yes, it's a topic I try to explore in the book. And to me, it's one of the main limits of the scene. Of course, it's part of the provocation. Of course, it's part of the shock factory, the shock tactic to subvert the mind, open it. But when you want to do that, you also have to, you need your audience be able to understand the concepts. And it's not necessarily the case when you play in a rock venues in which you have young or not young audience who didn't know anything about societies and control it. It's fine. But when you screen this kind of imagery, of course, some people from the right-wing movement are also part of the scene because violence is also part of their own culture and agenda. So they also, in a way, at certain moments, to me, instrumentalized a certain aspect of the scene, which is the main limits of it, because you can find a real instrumentalization of political movements and with a real agenda, political agenda. But from the moment it's in the book, so it was important to explore it.
I have a question from Kelly online. Salute, Nicolas. As a French person, I would be interested to hear more about your take on French industrial scene. What about Les Syndicats or Jean-Marie Vivenza, for example, which I feel were ever far more industrial in the Italian futurist tradition than any Throbbing Gristle or similar mainstream industrial acts? Your thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, Les Syndicats is great. With three amazing people, Roelgo, Zorin, and Mirka Lugosi, who is more into visual art today. Zorin is still very active, and such as Roelgo also. It was an amazing trio, and they also released other more noisy productions with Entrevif. And of course, Vivenza, Jean-Marc Vivenza, we were talking about fascist imagery, is one of the acts that also assume his own political agenda as a nationalist Bolshevik, and he was also one of the only musicians who took very literally the futurist heritage for apparently great productions in live. Yeah, but there is a tradition of industrial music and noise in France too, and Le Syndicat is very, very interesting for that, but not only, also La Nomenclature and Minamata, or DDAA, Déficit des années antérieures, those, Jean-Louis Costes. And talking about industrial music in France, it's, in terms of musical genre, it's we can find a diversity. Yes, I would say. It's more about experimental electronic music than industrial music, even if we can find it noise acts. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. I think this will reach.
Hi, I was just curious, if being in San Francisco or even Los Angeles, if anything, any special perspective came to you, because I grew up in Northern California, and when I think of Minimal Man, Factrix, Subterranean Records, Another Room magazine, there's just, I don't know if there's any special spots that the Keys Art Pavilion, or down in the BART tunnels where Chrome made films. I just wonder if anything special about San Francisco came to you from this visit.
Oh, the Keys Art Pavilion, for instance. Yeah, this kind of places. And talking about Los Angeles, I was very happy to be able to meet also Stuart Sweezy from Amok Books, who run a place, a bookstore in Vermont Avenue back then in the 80s, and he also curated the Desolation Center Music and Art Festival in the Mohawk Desert in the middle of nowhere, with people like Sonic Youth and Button, or also Boyd Rice and Monty Casazite, and the Survival Research Laboratories there. So to me, I feel very lucky to be able to experience it, in the flesh, in a sense. That's amazing.
Nicolas Ballet, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for all of you.